there's about, I would say 4 or 5 things that I think are very important when trying to select the right caulk. I mean, number 1 is life expectancy. I mean, if you're only expecting to be in the house for 2 to 3 years, maybe you want to buy the cheap caulk and do a cheap job. But for most of us, we want to do this caulk job once and never, ever have to do it again. So life expectancy is a very big part of it. And on my chart, I go from caulks that have a 3 to 5 year life expectancy all the way up to those caulks that have a 50-year life expectancy. And, let's see here. I would say that most of the caulks that I recommend to people probably have somewhere between 25 and 50-year life expectancy. Okay? 25 tends to be the cheapest caulk that I would recommend. 50 tends to be a fairly expensive caulk. Now, most of the caulks on the market are some sort of blend between an acrylic and a silicone. And as the caulks get longer life expectancies, the amount of silicone in the caulk becomes greater. Okay? Now, that silicone doesn't only affect how long the caulk's going to last, but also how much movement it's going to be able to take. Movement, if I was looking at a baseboard like this guy here, I mean, how much movement are you going to see along the baseboard of this wall? Negligible movement. Maybe movement over the course of 10 or 15 years. So you really don't need a real expensive or flexible caulk for something as simple as that. But if you've got a masonry chimney sealing up to the vinyl siding of your house, you've got 2 very different and unique products, and those products are going to expand and contract at different rates. They're going to put a lot of stress on a caulk. So usually when I'm looking at trying to seal between 2 different types of materials, I'm going to want a caulk that's quite high in silicone, because that's going to give us that maximum amount of flexibility as the 2 surfaces move. I also don't recommend real cheap caulks around doors, and some of that I addressed before. I mean, doors, they're open and closed. There's a lot of pressure on them as they get moved quite frequently, and so the seal around doors can experience a lot of stress. So you really don't want to use a cheap caulk when you're caulking around a door. All right, so I said there were 5 things that I was addressing. The life expectancy is one. The amount of flexibility is another. The amount of shrinkage. I mean, you want very little shrinkage in your caulk. And most of the siliconized caulks have very little shrinkage. The old oil-based caulks have pretty much disappeared from the market, and the same for the butyl rubber caulks that had a fair amount of shrinkage. But they have specific applications where they use these types of things. Just ask any roofer about butyl rubber caulk. They also call that blackjack. And it's very useful for sealing shingles, but not very useful for sealing around windows and doors. All right, and cost is of course a factor too. I mean, the more silicone you have in a caulk, the higher its cost is going to be. This is the 2 extremes I got here. I've got a painter's acrylic latex caulk in this hand. It's a 25-year caulk. I use it a lot on the interior houses, along baseboards, around windows, areas that don't get a lot of stress put on them. And the price on this is about $1.50 a tube, so it's really fairly cheap, but good caulk and paintable. You can paint over it. And then on the other extreme is pure silicone, and you will typically pay in excess of $5, maybe even $7 a tube. Pure silicone is really only useful for those extreme applications like I was talking about around masonry chimneys and things where you need maximum amount of flexibility. The other thing that I really don't like about silicone is it stinks to high heaven. So I don't recommend silicone-based products on the interior of the home, especially in the middle of winter. All right, now, there's other things on the chart, but you know, 90% of the time when I'm doing air sealing on the inside of the house and I'm talking about gaps around windows and along baseboards, a very inexpensive painter's caulk can do a wonderful job. Doors, you probably are going to want to get something that's a little more siliconized, like this 40-year caulk here. Can you get that okay, Abby? And again, the reason I recommend this more expensive caulk for around doors is just because of all the stress that the caulk has put on it by the opening and the closing of the door. Okay, so there we go.